All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Flatham. I am the co-founder of the Advocacy Greater Denver Transit. And this afternoon, I'm going to be presenting a webcast on some of the work that we've done around passenger rail equipment, some of the considerations for when an agency spins up a new passenger rail service or introduces new passenger rail equipment to an existing intercity passenger rail service, what some of the key considerations are in making those decisions, and the processes going into ultimately procuring a passenger rail fleet. So this is the second time that we have presented on this presentation. First, we had the honor of presenting this to a Boulder County and Mayor's event up in Longmont. Most recently, we were presenting this presentation to the Colorado Rail Passengers Association, along with the National Rail Historical Society. Unfortunately, the playback and the quality of the Wi-Fi was really poor at the venue that we presented at. So for posterity and for the future, wanted to kind of run through a repeat of this presentation and provide for a virtual audience kind of where we are at as of January 2026. And provide some of the insights that we've researched about what it's going to take to actually introduce new passenger rail service. So, starting with a little bit about myself. So my name is James Flatham. Like I said, I'm the co-founder of Greater Denver Transit. We are a grassroots advocacy based in Denver, focused predominantly on kind of the RTD Denver district, the kind of regional transit that we have here in the greater Denver metro area, as well as a lot of the kind of growing intercity corridors that are intersecting or originating in Denver that are being planned by CDOT as well as the Front Range Passenger Rail District. We'll talk a little bit more about that. My professional background is in corporate finance and just corporate management, but I've got a huge passion for rail, transportation, and energy. I'm a big student of history. I'm really interested and done a lot of research on the history of the Class 1 mergers here in North America, particularly in the Western US. And kind of as you can see here in this picture, right, I'm honored to be a part of a network of young railroaders, rail professionals who are interested and passionate about rail and see opportunity for future growth and expansion of passenger rail using the assets, the tremendous rail infrastructure that we have in Colorado and the Mountain West for more passenger rail service. I think just kind of a prevailing worldview for those of you who haven't interacted with Greater Denver Transit before or the Western Rail Coalition is just that I've got a really great personal respect and admiration for a lot of the great progress that has been made in Colorado and the Mountain West to expand local transit, regional rail, and a lot of the work that's gone into to lay the groundwork for intercity passenger rail. And definitely I've got my eye on the future about what it's going to take to expand some of this service. And that's going to be what we're going to be talking about today. A little bit about our group. First of all, we are, like I said, Greater Denver Transit is a grassroots advocacy, and this is kind of what we look like. A group of a very young advocacy here in Denver. We started in 2021, and we're really focused on the expansion of fast, frequent, reliable, and accessible transit. That is what we define, or I should say, how we define useful transit in the Denver area, the Greater Denver area, and the wider Colorado and Mountain West. We're focused, like I said, predominantly on RTD, but increasingly as the Colorado Department of Transportation, as CDOT has been investing in intercity transit, first in the form of Bustang, the really successful intercity bus service, and now with new projects between the Mountain Rail project as well as Front Range Passenger Rail, we see huge opportunities for us to have a voice in support of the expansion of these services. Our advocacy is primarily directed at kind of the RTD board that oversees and governs the RTD district here in Denver, as well as the RTD management team. Additionally, we do a considerable amount of advocacy, information, and collaboration with the state legislature, as well as the governor's office. The Western Rail Coalition is a more recent creation as we've kind of begun to really appreciate a lot of the great efforts and momentum that exists, not just in Colorado, but outside of Colorado, particularly in Utah. we've wanted to create a platform for ourselves to advocate in partnership with our partner groups across the mountains, not just the Colorado Rail Passengers Association here in Denver that's been doing great work across Colorado for the recent couple of decades, but also with the Utah Rail Passengers Association that have a great vision for spinning up intercity passenger rail services across Utah. Of course, ourselves as Core Greater Denver Transit, and then also the really innovative Via Rio Grande group, who've got a tremendous vision for Utah. Have got a tremendous vision for the heart of Salt Lake City to really reinvigorate a historic rail depot, reinstate through passenger rail service, and really kind of create a hub for the region that we are tremendously excited about. So for those of you who are interested in learning more, we will connect you with those websites and their movements at the end of this presentation. So when we talk about trains, I think as advocates, it's important for us to make sure that we're grounding how we talk about trains in the context of where other people are coming from, especially those who may not have perhaps a personal passion for trains, but have an interest in what they are and what they could do for the region. So I think the reality that we've seen as advocates over the last couple of years is that when we say train, that means a lot of different things to different people here, at least those in Colorado. First, just a little over 10 years ago, Colorado Department of Transportation commissioned a really large study around a maglev system, an advanced guideway system that was going to propose service to the mountains. This was fantastically cool and innovative. Unfortunately, in a Tabor state, which has a lot of financial restrictions, Taxpayers' Bill of Rights around how we can raise funding, as well as just the complexities of the infrastructure. This is something that was kind of shelved. So we are not going to be talking about maglev, just to put that in context today. Second, I think that perhaps for most people, especially those in the mountains, the kinds of trains that they're most familiar with, right, are the legacy, very kind of loud, powerful, impressive machines, these freight locomotives pulling these really long freight trains. But one of the things that we've seen when we talk about passenger rail is that there's a lot of concern about the noise of restoring rail service and whether or not that is going to be a return of kind of the loud sounds of pistons pulling these massive trains. We're not going to be talking about this either. What we are proposing is something that is entirely different from this. Then third and finally, what we are talking about today, fast modern transportation, the ability to spin up passenger rail services that have been providing rail across, transit value across the world. Over the last couple of decades now with current technologies that allow even the diesel-powered trains that provide services can be as quiet as a modern city bus. So we're going to talk to you all about kind of what this offering looks like and why I would make the case that folks in Colorado and Utah and across the Mountain West should be tremendously excited about the potential of further investment into intercity passenger rail. So kind of going back to Train 101. There are really two kinds of passenger train vehicles that we talk about. The first is the traditional locomotive hauled configuration. This is the kind, if you live in the United States, particularly in the West, most people are familiar with. You've got a prime mover, a single engine at the front of a train that pulls a consist of coaches. This is kind of the traditional train structure that most people are familiar with. But increasingly across the world, particularly in Europe as well as Northeast Asia, the current global best practice is actually multiple units. This is a kind of train that has distributed power across the multiple cars. There's each of the bogies and the wheels are powered, and you have a cab on both sides. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the differences and some of the trade-offs of why perhaps multiple units have emerged as a global best practice, while in North America in particular, even kind of the more cutting edge modern services, you still see locomotives playing a really big role. So in terms of the pros and cons, right? Locomotive hauled units are what a lot of folks are familiar with. The picture I'm showing right here on the bottom left, this is a Siemens Charger. This is what a contemporary lighter weight passenger locomotive looks like. It's got very low emissions. These are certified for Tier 4 emission standards, which meet the most rigorous federal requirements for emissions that at least a diesel locomotive is capable of producing so far, so very low emission. One of the things that we've begun to see in order to kind of make these services more flexible and kind of have the flexibility closer to what is possible with a multiple unit is attaching a cab car to them. And what these are basically coaches where one end of the coach has got an operator cab attached to it, so that when a train reverses, when it reaches a terminus point or the end of the line, right, the operator can get out of the cab, traverse the train, climb into the other cab on the other side, which is attached to a coach, and really seamlessly run the train in reverse, and can avoid a lot of the very kind of time-consuming turnaround maneuvers around a Y junction. And a Y junction is basically a rail term for basically a triangular shaped piece of track where traditionally a locomotive would have to reverse, kind of do a 3-point turn to be able to pull the train in the opposite direction. So I think the biggest downside, aside from the fact that these locomotives and the locomotive hull units are historically heavier and kind of take longer to speed up and slow down, traditionally speaking, is that even the very modern and lightweight locomotives are kind of considered dead space, right? These are specific sections of a train that are fundamentally not carrying passengers. And I think especially in Colorado, where we have a kind of our rail hub for the state at Denver Union Station, has got really short platforms. This is a really keen trade-off, right? Of that you are having your locomotive power, right? This is space you have to dedicate frequently to a platform that you can't board passengers from. So pros and cons, that it's very established, it's very well known. There's a wide variety of locomotives across the state. The challenge is that they definitely eat up a lot of extra platform space when platform space can be very limited. So talking about multiple units for a second, this is a picture of a Stadler Kiss. This is manufactured in Salt Lake City, but it's a Swiss company. And this is kind of a great example of what the contemporary standard is looking like for modern multiple units. You've got this train that's got a cab on both sides. It's powered by electric power with overhead wires, and it's basically the global best practice. When you look at Europe and Northeast Asia, their trains are overwhelmingly multiple units. The power is distributed throughout the train. That can allow for some redundancy, that if one section of the train might have a power issue, usually unless there's a really catastrophic power issue, you can kind of continue the service until the train gets taken out for maintenance. Operators' cabs are provided on both sides, so it's very efficient and very easy to change directions when you reach the end of the line. They're very quiet, but one of the challenges that you have is that given that these are usually semi-permanently coupled sets, they're harder to take apart, which means that there's a little bit more of a limitation when you try to make these trains longer or shorter. The downtime that's required to reconfigure them can be a little bit longer, especially when there's actually some damage. Let's say that there's some sort of accident, you have some rock fall, you have a tree land on the tracks, and there's a collision. Sometimes the maintenance to get these multiple units back into service can sometimes be a little bit longer because you can't usually detach very easily the one single car that was damaged. You usually have to take the multiple unit, the entire set, out of service in order to repair it. Not always true, but that is just in general. Usually there's a little bit more downtime when there's more substantial damage to a train in operations. Today, there's two passenger manufacturers that offer these in the United States. Only one of which is clearly offering a diesel variant today. So if you are operating trains where there does not exist that overhead wire infrastructure and you want to have a multiple unit, there's really only one game in town today that's got a design that's been approved by the FRA, which is the federal regulators in the United States. So, I mean, in terms of where there has been real progress over the last couple of decades, trains have gotten a lot quieter, even when they are powered by diesel. So what I'm going to show you is a video of, and just for a second, I'm going to shut up for a minute, but you can just listen to how quiet this is, where you don't have the loud kind of roaring pistons. You have something that sounds a lot like what used to be associated with an electric locomotive. So a very, very modern service. Again, this is Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas. So definitely, this counts as the United States. This is a modern European train that's been certified by the FRA to operate. Really comfortable on the inside, but really, I think for folks who are concerned about noise in particular, these trains are fantastically quiet and low impact to their surroundings. So something that can offer multiples of capacity as a city bus with the same amount of noise as a city bus when it goes by. So this is a picture of what the train looks like from a little bit set back. This is TexRail. And what we've begun to see is that manufacturers have become really creative and kind of future-proofing their designs. So just to focus on this one in particular, this is provided by Stadler. This is the same company that makes those KISS units that operate in the Bay Area that are electrified. The really cool thing about Stadler trains is that the flirt design that they offer, it has a power pack, which is kind of the smaller segment that you can see in this picture in the lower left. And what this allows is that, say there's only the budget initially perhaps to introduce a service that runs on diesel, that is for whatever reason the only practical source of propulsion. The power pack design allows for there to be upgrades over time where you can buy the train, you can buy the set, right? But as perhaps technology changes, as batteries get better, as perhaps hydrogen infrastructure is introduced, you can actually upgrade these to be powered by batteries, to be powered by hydrogen fuel cells, or overhead electric wires. So one of the things that we're kind of really excited to see is that train manufacturers are really beginning to try to look at the United States market, be locally responsive, recognizing that agencies are often having to take fairly incremental strategies, that they're trying to kind of signal themselves as good partners, that they're willing to kind of be there to upgrade themselves and allow for services to expand as the budget and the infrastructure allow for that expansion. All right, so really today, if you want to operate diesel services, services where you do not have overhead wires, you don't have necessarily those hydrogen supply chains, right? There is unfortunately a fairly limited set of options. There is no longer in the United States, I think a lot of people who are really passionate for US trains, they love the historic infrastructure, they love the historic trains. Those American companies like Bud and Pullman don't exist anymore. They're not making passenger rail equipment at scale. If you want to buy passenger trains today, there's really only 3 manufacturers who are building and manufacturing equipment that is approved by the FRA at scale. And these are the 3 companies. First, there's Alstom. Alstom is a French company. They recently acquired Bombardier, which for a lot of folks who are who live in the Western U.S. are kind of actually are going to be familiar. You may not know who they are, but you probably know their trains. So Alstom today offers a dual mode locomotive. This train here is an ALP 45. And what's cool about this locomotive is it can run off of diesel traditionally, but it can also run under electric wires and switch between the two seamlessly at speed. So you could perhaps be, and while it's not operated this way, at least in the US, New Jersey Transit is the largest transit agency in the United States that operates these, that they have the potential to be running under electricity. And when they reach the end of the electrified segment, they drop the pantograph. The pantograph is kind of the diamond-shaped metal fixture at the top of the train that connects it to wires to collect the electricity. They can seamlessly drop it. The train can continue as it's fired up its diesel engine and continue under diesel propulsion really seamlessly. So especially for networks like those in Colorado and Denver, where we have electrification infrastructure in the urban core, but we don't have the electrification infrastructure in the more rural areas, this kind of dual mode design offers a lot of advantages for that kind of flexibility. Siemens, like Alstom, offers a bi-mode offering. Siemens, this is a picture of the Aero train set that was visiting Denver on its way for testing down in the Pueblo TTC facility. So similar to Alstom, the Siemens units are pulled by a locomotive, but Siemens offers a fairly narrow offering of high floor only, and we'll talk about floor height in a few minutes, but a high floor offering of coaches and cab cars that are pulled by a single locomotive platform called the Charger. But what's cool about them, similar to what Alstom offers, is that Siemens offers dual mode capabilities, where when you connect their locomotive to, it's called an auxiliary power vehicle, an APV car, it can, similar to the Alstom ALP 45, it can collect overhead wire power and seamlessly transition to diesel operations while in motion. So it's a really cool technology. It offers similar flexibility. However, for Siemens, unlike Alstom, while Alstom offers both low floor and high floor options, Siemens' offering is high floor only. They have bet on basically the Northeast Corridor standard for trains. If you ride trains in the northeastern US. It's really designed to that Amtrak Northeast Corridor standard that they are betting is going to become the standard for the entire national US and Canadian intercity passenger rail market. Third and finally, Stadler, the Swiss company, they've got a plant in Salt Lake City, really close by to Denver. We've had the honor of getting to tour it. It was a really cool experience. Right now, kind of unlike Alstom and Siemens, Stadler only offers a low floor set of trains in their diesel configuration. In today's day and age, at least as of January, they do not have a high floor variation that is certified by the FRA. They currently in California, the KISS units that operate under electric wires, they have kind of an innovative multiple door structure where they've got a high floor and a low floor set of doors. We'll come back to that, why that's important. But all to say is that your options today are fairly constrained to these three companies. And in terms of intercity rail, it is currently Siemens has been selling the largest, overwhelmingly, the largest volume of intercity vehicles for Amtrak, as well as via Amtrak in the United States, as well as via rail in Canada. And it's increasingly becoming clear that this high floor, 51-inch high floor height is becoming the intercity standard across North America. And that includes Mexico increasingly as well in an intercity configuration. There's a little bit more variety in what exists and what's available at kind of the more regional local commuter options where you see some more low floor offerings as well. But we'll come back to why floor height really matters in just a few minutes. So when you operate a passenger service around existing freight units, there's a lot of stuff that you need to consider. The first is just that unlike most of the rest of the world, right, in the United States, 99% of the track, of the railroad track is owned by private freight railroad companies, most of whom do not consider passenger rail to be their core of their business. They are primarily operating freight rail, and the class one, the largest companies really offer, they really focus on bulk shipments. They like intermodal trains, they like large unit trains being the entire consist of cars is the same. This is a picture of a unit train on the lower right, those coal cars, a train that is entirely dedicated to moving coal. But to operate passenger rail service around freight trains, right, a public agency or authority has to either acquire, they need to buy out the tracks from that private railroad, or they need to pay use fees basically to operate trains over the freight tracks, which oftentimes are still being used, right, to serve freight clients as well. The other important thing to remember for the United States and Canada, right, is that the track specification itself, right, is optimized for safe and profitable freight, right? The idea of making really efficient, robust, very rugged track, right, that is obviously safe and reliable from a freight perspective, but certainly doesn't prioritize the kind of glass smooth service that you would experience when you ride a train in Northeast Asia or in Europe. It's just fundamentally not core to the freight company's operating business model. Not to say that they don't do it when they're paid for it, but it's really just important to remember what the freight companies consider to be the core of their business, why they exist, how they make their money, right, is overwhelmingly around freight infrastructure. So when you consider passenger infrastructure to be laid and built around it, right, you have to make sure that there is the compatibility, that the underlying freight business, right, still works, and that the freight companies do not have additional problems and complexities in offering their core of their business around this passenger service that we're talking about introducing. And fundamentally, that means that the passenger rail infrastructure you're going to introduce on these tracks that share with freight trains have to be designed to operate around that freight infrastructure and be compatible. So that's just where it's important to recognize and approach these freight companies as partners and just have kind of a self-awareness around where the tension points that could exist to make sure that there can be operating arrangements that are sustainable, right? So assuming that the passenger operation isn't going to outright buy out the tracks, right? And they're intending to kind of lease or pay use fees to operate on the tracks. It's important to remember that freight railroads in North America can and do partner in good faith to support passenger operations when they are financially incentivized to do it. And this is where the operating agreements are so important. The challenges, I think, often layer in around that the additional overlay infrastructure that's designed for passenger service to operate optimally, right, can sometimes be at odds with the underlying freight business model. And we'll talk about a couple examples of where this is. The first is that a lot of times for passenger operations to be flexible and nimble, you need to add switches, crossovers, and other infrastructure for sidings. And the challenge is that when this is done, a lot of times the additional sidings, the additional switch infrastructure can be perceived by the freight rail companies as adding additional points of failure. That this is another piece of infrastructure that needs to be maintained, that needs to be screened and scrutinized over time to operate. So that way, when you're positioning and you're putting together a contract to install a passenger rail service, you have to be able to come to an agreement about what this infrastructure is that is going to be ultimately paid for, right? If it's not core to the freight operations, making sure that whatever the funding agreement is going to be covered by that passenger rail operator because it's perceived as not core to the underlying freight operations. So that's kind of an area of challenge. Another area of challenge is the platforms themselves. Over time, over the last 50 or so years, that the freight vehicles, the freight cars that operate have been growing incrementally wider. And as a consequence of that, a lot of freight cars are no longer able to operate through the passenger loading gauge that exists in the northeast of the US that has those high platforms around that standard that Amtrak and predecessor railroads developed. So in the western US, it's very rare that you see high platforms at all. The specification for most Class 1 railroads prohibits any platform higher than 8 inches over the top of the rail. As a consequence of that, the picture that you're seeing here shows an example of dedicated passenger track, right? You see that there is freight track further over to the right of this photo, right? That is because an 8-inch platform is the maximum height of what would be allowed. If you want to offer level boarding to a high floor passenger train, you need to do one of two things. Either you need to buy out the track outright, or you need to build a dedicated station siding that has that high platform that the freight rail companies are not allowed to use themselves. So it's an area of negotiation, right? Where you're coming back to that additional infrastructure that is non-core to the freight rail operations. And then finally, overhead catenary systems across the world. You go to Europe, South America, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia. Overwhelmingly, passenger services are powered by electric wires that power electric motors. North America is an exception to that, where our freight rail infrastructure did not adopt that infrastructure during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They've looked at it since then, viewed it as a fairly expensive and risky investment in their business model. And because they haven't adopted it for freight operations, it's really expensive and very difficult to convince freight operators to install overhead wires over their tracks for a number of reasons. Not just from the maintenance stuff that we talked about, but also for training. Right, overhead energized wires would require an entirely different training and procedures to maintain for their workforce that they currently don't do. So again, this is viewed as a point of friction and tension, where generally speaking, if you want to electrify a railroad, overwhelmingly in North America, you're doing that on dedicated track that you have to basically buy outright from a Class 1 railroad. There's some very minor exceptions, but they're few and very far between. So let's talk about why platform height matters for a second. So you see in this picture, this is a long distance Amtrak train. And you see that where the platform is, right, where the people are standing, there's a pretty big difference between where their feet are and where basically the floor of a vehicle is. And this is a fundamental geometry problem that needs to be solved. How do you get someone from the platform onto the train, especially when you have considerations for riders with disabilities? So in the 1990s, during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, Congress passed and George Herbert Walker Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act. As a consequence of that, that changed forever the equipment specifications that could be approved, as well as what operating patterns and the surrounding infrastructure for new infrastructure that will be built to support intercity passenger rail. In Colorado and Utah, the intercity trains that you see operated by Amtrak, those cars were manufactured before the ADA was signed into law overwhelmingly. So what the future is going to look like is going to be a little bit different. And we're going to talk about kind of what some of the trade-offs are. So the first, let's talk about high platforms. Those who are from the Denver area will be very familiar with this. High floor platforms connects to floors of trains that are about 51 inches above the top of the rail. And they enable really fast, very convenient level boarding at all doors. And this is something that kind of our group, Greater Denver Transit, we've been very critical of RTD at a lot of junctures. But one of the things that we are really proud of them for, and something that we believe was a really important investment that they made, was that they built dedicated track and they bought high floor trains that were compatible with the Northeast Corridor and the Amtrak intercity standard. And as a consequence of doing that, it's a really dignified experience. If you're in a wheelchair or any kind of mobility device, almost always you are able to walk or roll right up to the edge of the train to a door, press a button, the door opens, and you are able to board the vehicle without assistance. It's a really great experience, and really, even compared to the rest of the world, the United States has really gone really far to be able to equalize the experience in terms of transportation for riders with disabilities, especially physical disabilities, and those without. So right now, the RTD commuter rail infrastructure, 6 of the 8 tracks at Denver Union Station are high floor. And what that means is that, just based on physics, right? If you have a train that's got a lower floor where the doors are below this platform level, you physically can't board trains, which means that if you were to pull one of those Amtrak superliners that I was showing a few minutes ago, if you were to pull that into one of these platforms, you physically cannot board riders because the doors are several feet below the level of the platform. So you've got a core compatibility issue, where as long as we are operating around the limitations of Denver Union Station, which already is the hub for Colorado's rail, right, especially around the greater Denver metro, we're talking about trains that are going to need to be high platform practically, because 1, we're out of room at Denver Union Station, so we can't really build new platforms economically, and 2, 6 of the 8 tracks that we have are dedicated to that high floor specification, where it's physically impossible to pull in trains that are based with those low floor, those low doors. So if we're talking about Denver, trains that run and serve Denver with any frequency, we're probably talking about a high floor train. So this is a picture of Salt Lake City, and for those of you who live in Salt Lake City, you might be familiar. This is a train that was built by Bombardier. They're now owned by Alstom. This is called a bi-level. And what's interesting about Salt Lake City is that they bought their front runner tracks outright from a freight railroad. As a consequence of that, they were able to build to a platform specification that was higher than 8 inches. And this is a very common car that's being used for commuter railroads across the Western US and Canada. It's got 24 inches above the top of the rail. And as a consequence of that, you basically have to pay the same penalty in terms of the mitigation that you would need to pay to build a high platform. It just so happens that at the time that Salt Lake City's UTA was working on this order, there was a wide availability of these low floor commuter trains. They chose this for front runner. Since then, the intercity market has really diverged. There have been 0 intercity trains. And when I say intercity, I'm talking a longer distance train service of well over kind of a couple hundred miles usually. There has not been any intercity equipment that has been built to that high, there's not been any intercity equipment that has been built to this low floor standard. Low floor has really only been built for commuter and regional equipment. So Salt Lake City is interesting. It's one of the only places in the country where they actually have level boarding for this 24-inch spec. So when you're a company or when you're an agency that's considering new passenger equipment, the thing that you have to contend with is that whatever you operate here, right, if you were to buy this train and bring it to Colorado, bring it to Denver, bring it to the Northeast Corridor, this train cannot serve most infrastructure in the Northeastern US. And it also cannot serve most of the platforms at Denver Union Station, which is a challenge for us. Works great in Salt Lake City because they have this bespoke system that they built specifically to this specification. So low floor platforms, they can be built to level boarding, but you cannot do it on dedicated or on freight owned track. If you want to run this train on freight tracks and you want to offer level boarding, you still got to build a dedicated siding or buy the track. So yeah, same penalty in terms of money, with the exception of you're laying a little bit less concrete. You're having a lower platform, just a difference of concrete. So third and finally, for those of you who've ever ridden the Winter Park Express, this is a familiar picture. This is the platform at the Winter Park Resort. And the train that's serving it is a Amtrak Superliner. This is a train specification that has not been manufactured since the year 2002. Now that the ADA has been ingrained into law for 3 decades, more than 3 decades, Amtrak is trying to update these because most of these trains were manufactured in the 1970s. They're having a really hard time filling this order. They had an RFP, a request for proposal, out that initially had no takers. So there's kind of this anticipation that there is something that is not available in the market today that could become available in the future. There's a lot of questions about what it's going to look like. But as a specification, this is an 8-inch platform that's compatible with mainline freight operations. This is a freight main at this station. And the vehicle itself is actually lower than the trains we just talked about. Instead of a 24-inch platform or a 24-inch floor height, these trains have an 18-inch floor height. So that difference between the floor of the train and the floor of the platform is only 10 inches, which means that under the ADA law, practically, it's now possible to build automatic gap extenders that bridge from this 18-inch floor height automatically down to an 8-inch platform. This is only possible for an 18-inch floor train. By the time you get to a 24-inch train, the length of the bridge plates gets so long that it's not expected that that would meet ADA requirements. So basically, auto extending gaps down to an 8-inch platform is possible with this legacy infrastructure if Amtrak can figure out with one of those manufacturers an ADA approved version or a contemporary version of a Superliner. We don't know what that looks like yet. So if you were out on the market today, you can't buy this specification yet. At least you can't build it up. You can't buy it off the shelf. No one's making it. So what happens if we buy that high floor intercity spec that Amtrak is standardizing across the national network, that exists in Denver at Union Station, that exists on the Northeast Corridor, that most Northeast commuter agencies are buying to? Also happens to be the high-speed rail specification as well as this high floor. If we were to buy one of these, what do we have to do in the mountains and in other places where for whatever reason we don't have that high platform? Well, the answer is practically, for most people who are able-bodied, it's a trapdoor, right? What happens is that there's kind of a false floor here that pops out and a set of stairs basically unrolls in physically, right? There's a couple different mechanisms depending on the equipment that you buy. However, obviously someone in a wheelchair or a mobility device will need mitigation. So what that usually means is at a station, there will need to be some infrastructure that's provided at the station in order to board riders and mobility devices. For the most part, what this means is that if you are in a wheelchair, there is a mechanical lift that needs to be operated by a human, right? So this is not boarding without assistance. You need physical assistance for someone to get off the train, to locate a little shed where they store these. They will operate the mechanical lift, board the passenger, take the lift and put it away. And just without a lot of imagination, right, you can understand that this increases dwell time. This will slow down the journey as a consequence of that. If not that, the only other option is a high block. And what a high block is that there's a ramp in a very specific part of the platform that's set back. And then you'll have the conductor of the train lift out a metal bridge plate and place it over to connect to that high block. So what this means is that if you don't build level boarding, what that means is that you are going to have a loading facility or a loading procedure for riders with disabilities and mobility devices that will take longer and will be operationally complex and has less dignity and convenience for the rider who is disabled. So I think when we look at this as a journey, right? Is that there may be stations in the mountains, especially of Colorado, where this is going to be the initial experience. But the hope is that over time, right, what we want to see is infrastructure incrementally expanded to have that level boarding at most stations over time. when that's possible to do, either through dedicated station sidings or through dedicated track when the budget allows for that. So let's talk about the train interiors themselves for a second and why you should be excited about it. I think a lot of folks who ride in Denver, Seattle, other kind of Western cities, you're used to kind of these sterile, clinical interiors. Sometimes plastic seats, not very comfortable. The standard today for intercity equipment is trains that are a lot more comfortable and just kind of a lot prettier on the inside, a lot more pleasant of a ride experience. And part of that is due to the fact that they have to be. These journeys aren't just like an hour and a half from like a commute that you might do during the week. They can be closer to 8 hours in length to traverse the full width of Colorado. And Utah, there's also expected to be some longer intercity journeys as well. So as a consequence of that, there's more amenities and kind of creature comforts that are emerging as kind of the standards for intercity passenger rail. So when we talk about kind of what seating options are available, there's kind of a variety of seating options, but all of them today, standard for intercity equipment, overwhelmingly, you see USB and power charging offered at every single seat, because the expectation is people are traveling with devices, phones, tablets, laptops. Keeping those charged for the long journey is a basic consideration today. You've got kind of the airline style seating, allows couples and solo travelers to ride enjoy some privacy. Social passengers, and this is kind of my preferred way of traveling, is finding a table where you'll have 4 seats, 2 facing each other, and being able to have a little bit more robust of a desk or kind of a table, be able to work on your laptop, play cards and stuff like that, eat food, socialize. It's, in my opinion, just overwhelmingly the way I'd prefer to travel when I travel by train. And one of the other things that kind of I think can surprise some people is that even if a first class, a business class, a premium cabin isn't something that's available to everyone, a core reason that you would probably want to consider offering it as a transit agency or authority is that by being able to sell tickets at that higher price point, that higher level of revenue can help offset the cost and lower the net operating subsidy of the train and make the train cheaper to operate in aggregate. So one of the things that we've seen with success on the Northeast Corridor, as well as some of the state-sponsored services that Amtrak operates, is that this is something that should be really considered, because even if it's not available to everybody, it can make the entire operation, when planned correctly and when priced appropriately, a little bit less expensive to operate. Luggage is another really important consideration for Colorado, given where the trains are expected to operate, not just north and south along the Front Range, where people are expected to be traveling with bicycles, but also for the mountain rail considerations, trains going up into the mountains to ski resorts. We also need to make sure that there's room for skis, boot bags, and the luggage that you would expect for folks who are traveling to the mountains, and all the fun mountain toys that people bring with them. So overhead luggage racks allow for small bags. So that's a very basic thing that you see across the world. That's not the hard part. It's overwhelmingly the really large bags, the skis and the bikes, that we need to make sure that this is something that is thought through, something that is really planned for, that if your goal is to have a harmonized fleet where you can send a train on the Front Range one day and send it to the mountains the next, you got to make sure that the luggage considerations that you have fit for as large of a swath of journeys as you possibly can. That way people can travel comfortably and you can incrementally grow your service over time. So yeah, bicycle space, ski space, vital. Food and beverage. Okay, so this is why traveling by train is better than driving or riding in a bus, is that you have a bistro car when you have an intercity passenger service. As a basic, when you have a train service longer than a couple of hours, you almost always see some sort of food or snack service being available. And increasingly in some parts of the world, for shorter journeys, you're kind of seeing these automated kind of vending machine style offerings. I think most people who I talk to who are looking at kind of the Colorado market and the Utah market agree that we're probably going to need a human staffed cafe, especially if you're going to serve alcohol. Obviously, US law requires that you have an attendant who can check IDs and verify all of that, for at least for now. So we just think a fully staffed cafe bar is going to be a basic that we're going to want to have. In the Winter Park Express train that operates in Denver today, between Denver and Winter Park Resort, actually brings in a huge amount of its revenue from concessions and food and alcohol sales. So another thing that can lower the net operating subsidy of a route, right? If you can price and staff and offer a really, really good food and beverage offering, this is something that can make the train a little bit more affordable, a little bit cheaper to operate over time, lower that net operating subsidy. The other really cool thing for this is, and this is something just as someone who's traveled by train, a lot of times when you are on a train journey later at night, you kind of want to be respectful to your fellow riders. That way, kind of the normal coach area is really quiet. If you're, still in a social mood and you're still got lots of energy, a lot of times the seating area in the cafe cars is a great place to spend your time late at night. That way you can play cards, enjoy food, and not disrupt the other riders on the train and allow them to maybe get a little bit of shut eye on their journey. So just cabin ambiance. This is a picture of a train that operates in Switzerland. And this train probably looks like it's something out of a different century from those of you who are used to riding Amtrak. And you're right, actually. This is out of a different century. This is a contemporary train that's got a lot of interior design elements that just makes it look nice, right? Is that you've got a glass vestibule here to separate a little bit of the noise. This is really critical. Between kind of the sections between the cars where you have wheels, having doors that automatically close to keep sound out and kind of minimize disruption and disturbances for riders who are enjoying the train ride. It's just a series of basics in what is considered the basics for intercity passenger rail today. Part of this is also just mood lighting, right? You don't have the clinical kind of fluorescent lights on the top that a lot of folks who, especially who've ridden trains in the Northeast, are used to. You kind of got mood lighting and accent lighting. One of the critical things to get right, and this is actually something that you can hold your local regional operator accountable for, is that it's usually the local agency and the rail authority that makes the decision about the seating configuration of their trains. So it's really important, especially in beautiful states like Colorado and Utah, where part of the pitch is going to be enjoying the beauty and the views of outside the train, making sure that the seats and the window bulkheads align where people who have a seat have a window view, right? And this is something that is possible to screw up. You go to Germany and you ride on the ICE4 today, which is the newest generation of high-speed trains in Germany. There are lots of seats that are bulkhead seats where riders don't get views. So it is possible to screw this up in today's day and age in evolved rail systems in Europe. So it's going to be really important for us that, especially if we're going to be marketing these trains as real experiences where you get to enjoy nature and enjoy the view, make sure that you get the seating configuration correct to maximize the views out the window. And then finally, right, there's ways that you can kind of brand your service even with the seat design. So this is a picture on the bottom right of a train that operates in Austria. In this train, they've got a standardized seat design which shows several layers of mountains. It's just kind of cool. It just reminds the passengers that we're not going to work, right? This is a train that's going to the mountains and stuff like that. Layers of kind of design that makes the service just a higher quality experience for people. And it's these decisions that don't cost enormous amounts of money, but it's our incremental investments that just add a little bit of panache to the service. That we expect that there are going to be a cohort of people who ride the train who are going to be parking at a parking lot and getting out of their kind of personal bubble into a train, which is in many ways a public bubble. So I think it's incumbent on us, in order to make transit successful, the goal should be we want to make this kind of public bubble as nice as we possibly can. So accessibility, right? This is something that's really important. And I think from an advocacy standpoint, when you talk to a lot of folks in our group, what we'll say is that the ADA, the letter of the law, should be considered the floor, not the ceiling or the sum of our ambitions and aspirations, right? And this is where, like, coming back to putting these pieces together, the level boarding is so important. The retractable doors, one of the things that we're beginning to see today, it's kind of interesting, is that even though the 51-inch floor height is becoming the standard, a lot of times Amtrak is actually recommending, and the FRA is recommending a platform that's a couple inches shorter and a little bit set back, and that you see these auto extending gap fillers, even if it's just a couple inches, 3 to 4 inches, is going to make the train a little bit more affordable and cheaper to maintain over time, just because over time the weight of the train forces the tracks to kind of move out of sync a little bit. If you kind of give yourself a little bit of breathing room on the front end, you can save yourself millions of dollars over time, and also lengthen the windows between the track maintenance that you have. Just makes the system a little bit more rugged, but often a little bit more maintainable. And then critically, from an accessibility standpoint, it's not just getting onto the train, it's making sure that there's a space on the train for riders and mobility devices to get to be for the duration of the ride. A lot of times you can see people travel together, right? Where you'll not just have one person in a mobility device, but you might have two or three. And one of the things that we're beginning to see is that planners and a lot of the train designers are beginning to really account for that, to make sure that the riders who are in mobility devices have comfortable places where they can enjoy the train together and are not going to have to be dispersed because, oh crap, sorry, we only have room for one wheelchair in this car. The other people have got to go in the back, right? Moving and evolving beyond that and offering something that is just a more fun experience for people, for more groups of people, for the largest group of people we possibly can. So let's talk about station designs for a second. hate to use Utah as an example, but I can pull plenty in California and Washington that have the same problem. This is a picture of the North Temple Station in Salt Lake City, and unfortunately, this is kind of the design that a lot of Americans have put up with and have gotten used to. Where you've got a really basic structure, where you've got the platform, you've got a couple shade structures that kind of insulate you a little bit from the worst of the elements, but you look around it and there's almost nothing in terms of amenities that are really conveniently walkable immediately from the platform, right? Where what's standard in a lot of places, right, is that you can sometimes walk, grab a snack, grab a coffee, back in the day, you'd get a newspaper. Maybe nowadays you might get a magazine or something like that. You have just this big dead zone. And especially when you have trains that operate only hourly or sometimes less often than hourly, it can create these dead zones that kind of feel unsafe. Or even if you these zones are well lit, given how little traffic there is, given how few people live nearby, just nearby pedestrian traffic, these kind of incentivize or allow for kind of a perception of this being attractive for people who are doing illegal behaviors to congregate, because it's out of the public eye. And I think critically what we've seen as a best practices is that if you want to make the train service, and when I say train service, the entire experience of riding the train, including transfers, comfortable and convenient, you want to have more activated spaces where immediately next to the train platforms, you want to have these developments. You want to have amenities that are available to the public for people to enjoy while they wait. And also, right, when a train gets canceled, places for you to go, maybe give someone some business and enjoy and wait out your delay, right? It's this element of the experience in North America, perhaps more than any other, right, that we think can be very economically improved. And especially in Colorado, where we're spinning up some inner city corridors from scratch, it's going to be really important for us to learn and hopefully do quite a bit better than this going forward. So not to highlight this on a pedestal, but want to highlight an example of something that Texas on their Tex rail system got correct. The obvious thing that's missing from here is development. You get off the station, you walk down these ramps or the stairs here, and obviously the big thing that's missing is that there's no TOD, there's no transit-oriented development, there's no apartments, there's no restaurants, there's no coffee shops. Those things are absent. But one thing that this service did get right was the prioritization of other modes of transportation. The idea is that you want to cement transit as a core habit, right? That if we're going to invest in an intercity passenger rail system, we don't want it to just be a novelty that somebody uses once as kind of a tourist experience. We want it to be integrated with how people live their lives as part of their daily routines or weekly routines. And a critical connection point for the high likelihood demographic who are going to be using the intercity services are those who are going to be relying on transit. So connecting your train service to local bus services as the highest priority is something that this station gets right. It's kind of hard to see a little bit behind the shaded trees here, but there's bus bays that are moving in both directions. So the first thing you get to as a transit rider when you get off of the train, you walk or you roll down these ramps, the very first connection that is prioritized, that is made most convenient, is a really solid bus connection, right? Especially for riders who are really time sensitive, they're trying to catch the bus, right? Doing everything you can in the design to make it as easy as possible for people to make those connections, right? The second thing that's just behind the bus you can see pictured here are bike racks. The idea that another group who's highly likely to ride the train really consistently is people who are able to bike from where they live to a local train stop, right? That is kind of the next tranche of people who are prioritized. Following that, the third group is kind of the drop-off point, right? The kiss and ride, the park and ride. The idea is you want to make it really easy for somebody who's maybe carpooling for part of their commute. You got, moms and dads dropping off their kids to go to school or something like that, making it really easy and convenient for those people. And then the longer term parking, you put that at the very back, right? Because oftentimes, right, those are the habits that can kind of be at odds with adopting trains. So it's not to say that people who drive cars should have no access to trains. That's not what we're saying at all. But it's a matter of prioritization, of saying that we want to reinforce the habits that are going to make the intercity train journeys a success, part of the culture, and really develop and expand, right, a transit culture over time. So like I said, these should be multimodal mobility hubs, right, where we really do plan for integration with bus, with microtransit, with bikes, scooters, right? And we should prioritize the order of those amenities according to that which is going to reinforce and support the intercity passenger rail service over time. So now, unfortunately, to find an amazing example of a suburban station, we had to leave the United States. This is a picture of a station in Central Europe. And what you can see here, right, is that there's a train platform right here, track one. And when you just kind of predict what your experience would be like as a rider getting off at the station, right, and you can see how it's laid out. The design makes this really easy for people to do the right thing. The first thing you get to when you get off the train is a trash can and recycle bin, right? So eliminating the chance or decreasing the chances of people littering, you make it really easy for people to do the right thing. The next closest thing is a kiosk. This kiosk has some sodas, maybe some beer. I don't know the laws of this country, but they've got drinks, coffees. If the weather's bad, you got a little bit of a wait, a place for you to go, patronize, give somebody a little bit of your business, right? And then just behind that is a really well laid out bus depot that makes it really easy to make a transfer. So the idea is you're coming off of a journey on a train, you've got kind of a tight bus connection, making it as likely as possible that a passenger could make that connection and make it conveniently, especially if they are in a mobility device of some kind and need a little bit of extra time, doing everything you can with the design to even the odds and even the experience as much as possible for car versus transit. So the hope is that, especially in the Front Range in Colorado, where we do kind of have these kind of historical town centers that oftentimes were around a historic depot of some kind, to kind of use this design as the retrofit to reinvigorate those neighborhoods and make this as strong of a kind of a suburban hub as is possible to do. So how do we do that in a Colorado way or a Utah way? Well, a lot of times what's really cool is that we do have intact historic depots in a lot of places. This is a picture of the Grand Junction Union Depot in Grand Junction, Colorado. There is an active project that is out there that is raising money to restore this to its rightful use as a rail hub. There's a great group called the Friends of GJ Union Depot. And if you're interested and you're connected with Grand Junction, I'll send you, I'll offer some connections to that offline. But the idea is that the rail depots are already geographically located to become, once again, the kind of the neighborhood, the regional hubs for the services and the communities that sometimes used to exist in history. One of the cool things that we see going on in Grand Junction right now is that in addition to kind of this place-making historic structure that's being restored, the city is already preemptively relocating the local transit hub with the bus and the micro transit connections immediately right next to this building. So we're already seeing in anticipation, even before we've expanded any rail service to Grand Junction, you see a great example, right, of a city and a region that's looking at the future, that's kind of thinking about what assets they have, right, historic community assets that we can repurpose for the future, right? This is a great example of kind of doing both of those things, of kind of honoring the past, restoring a beautiful piece of the city's history, but also having this become the focal point of what should hopefully be a dynamic new neighborhood of the city that you can most efficiently cluster residential apartments, condos nearby, new developments, restaurants, coffee shops, and creating a really great walkable neighborhood in this corner of town that has historically been underinvested in, right? It's this kind of phenomenal neighborhood and this kind of strategy that we saw became so amazing in Denver Union Station. If you look at my screen immediately behind me, you'll see a neighborhood that didn't exist as recently as 2009. There was basically dirt, there was dirt behind me. And as of part of this Union Station redevelopment, we built the most thriving neighborhood in Denver. And it's some place that I'm terrifically proud to live in. And I get to enjoy and benefit from this because my predecessors understood and saw the potential of what this place could be if it was activated as a hub, a multimodal hub. And that's what it has become today. So one of the last things I'll talk about in terms of getting right, is information globally outside of North America. When you ride on trains in Northeast Asia and Europe, it's not just a matter of you have a static schedule, you look at it, you find your train number, you see the time it's supposed to arrive. We have left that as the standard in the dust. That is a last century experience. Today, when you travel in Central Europe and Germany and Switzerland especially, and you look at an information window or a screen, you're often able to see not only the train that you're on by recognizing it by number, it tells you very clearly the destination, it tells you the estimated time to arrive and warns you of any delays there might be. It'll often even tell you how much room the train has, how long the train is, which cars have space, right? So you can actually preemptively walk along the platform to the section of the train that's got room, right? Using basic information and using systems that already exist in other parts of the world is one of the basics that we can do, and we can adapt in Colorado to make sure that all of the kind of the edges of this experience, right, are tied together where people will have the confidence to ride, right? The idea that when they reach a station and the train isn't there yet, they will get the information they need that confirms that they're where they need to be, that their train is coming, that their bus is coming, right? And that they can kind of cool off for a second and enjoy themselves, take in the moment, and not have to be constantly worried about, oh my gosh, is my train going to show up or not, right? You get that confirmation, you get that live information, that high quality of information reinforces your overall comfort and confidence in doing this, especially doing this on a regular basis where you've got places to be, you're not on vacation, you're trying to get to a doctor's appointment, you're trying to get to work. It's this level of information that makes people a lot more confident to use transit when they do have deadlines and times of where they really have to be in a specific place. So something that can be gotten, we can get this right. It's relatively affordable compared to building new tracks or new stations and new sidings, right? This is a relatively affordable thing that we can get right to make this intercity experience something that is a 21st century experience that is worthy of spinning up from scratch. So for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with the exact train routes and what exists today, we put forward this map that's designed to really just show you, if we didn't build any new track, if we literally just put in passenger trains on tracks that already exist, where are the places we could connect with this? So we've actually got quite a lot of basic infrastructure that already exists for us to take advantage of in Colorado. The Front Range corridor is advancing right now as an early place of investment. We're beginning to see something that will very possibly go to the ballot, a project to be voted on by the voters as soon as November. That will start a train service between Fort Collins and Pueblo. Fort Collins in the north through Boulder, through Denver, through the Springs, down to Pueblo in the south. But we also have huge opportunities in the mountains. And this is one of the things that when we talk about as advocates what the opportunity is, I think there's a consensus, certainly at Greater Denver Transit and a lot of our friends in the mountains, we kind of accept that we don't necessarily get to prioritize what project happens first. Not singularly, at least, right? Because there's so much that goes into that between support from the governor's office, the state legislature, local counties and cities support and stuff like that. But what we can do as advocates and what we've been really successful at over the last couple of years is by kind of presenting a menu of possibilities, we were able to find people who maybe live in little towns like Salida and Buena Vista. And we can kind of put this on the map, kind of plant the seed in their mind to say, hey, what if we had a train in your town? What if it ran really frequently? right? What journeys could be possible to do with the rail infrastructure? And you have these little cases that kind of pop out, but maybe people weren't thinking about. But for instance, there's an inactive corridor in Colorado called the Tennessee Pass. It goes from Pueblo in the southeast, that orange line, and connects at Dot Cerro to the bigger cities of the western slope, like Glenwood Springs and Grand Junction. But it's an inactive section of track. However, it's not being used. However, the tracks already go to a major airport in Eagle County that receives most of the airplane service for people going to ski at Vail and Beaver Creek resorts. Breckenridge, Copper Mountain, really big destinations. You've got an airport right there, and the train goes directly to a gondola at the bottom of Beaver Creek Resort in Avon, Colorado. Just kind of being able to kind of help people picture this, because I might find someone who's passionate and excited about that project, but maybe we're talking to a politician and they see a different stretch of this corridor that's really exciting to them. So that's where I think from an advocacy standpoint, what we would recommend, especially for folks we like to fold in to the Western Rail Coalition, Greater Denver Transit, is to say, let's start with what's possible. We're not going to say we're going to build this corridor before this corridor, this city, Castle Rock deserves this before Boulder, or vice versa, right? We're not going to say that, right? But what we will say is, hey, we're going to have a home for you as our group to join. If you want to support this, you want to see passenger rail expand again, we're going to be a home for you. We're going to be a group. We're going to give you a platform to help advocate to your local county folks, your city folks, the gov's office, the legislature, whoever it is in a position of power, who's of a position of authority to help advance these projects, right? This is how we're going to be successful. And where we've already seen success, right, is as a partnership between some recent mayors in the Tennessee Pass corridor. We've created and we've helped supported a new task force in Eagle County that's exploring ways to find money to do a study and kickstart that service I was talking about between that airport in Eagle County and Beaver Creek Ski Resort, a service that doesn't exist today, but a service for those of us who've taken a look at it and visited looks immensely valuable, and especially valuable to people who aren't necessarily have any personal affinity for trains. But if it means you don't need to rent a car, if it means that you can land and you can really conveniently get to the gondola, get to your hotel, you don't need to rent a car, that's value. And it's the kind of thing that we want to see more of. And we want to talk, and when we reach people and we talk to them about trains, it's not saying let's build a train for the sake of having a train. Let's make really thoughtful investments using the infrastructure we have, right, better. Especially because when you look at places like Glenwood Springs, you haven't visited Colorado. This is a separate presentation. But when people talk about, investments in transportation and how difficult I-70 is, people talk about adding another lane. In Glenwood Canyon, there is no room for another lane. So that's where kind of like when we use this language of what is an efficient, what is a possible way to introduce more transportation capacity in our states that can get really choked up by cars today, this is an alternative that has served enormous value in other parts of the world, and we think very clearly does not require a lot of imagination to see how it could provide value here. Crossing the mountains over to Utah for a second, the Utah Rail Passengers Association in Utah has put forward a very clear vision, a really cool vision for what corridors exist in Utah that could also be repurposed for passenger service rather than just freight. And you can see kind of here, and there's a lot more details you can find on the Link Utah website, which I'll connect you to, that there's a really clear vision for kind of the similar thought process in Utah, that we have these existing rail assets. We have these high demand places. We have places people want to go. Absolutely sublime tourist destinations in Moab, huge population centers, not just in Salt Lake City, but connecting Provo and Ogden directly on through corridors to these places really could create an enormous amount of value. So if you're on the Utah side of things, I really encourage you to check out Link Utah, the Utah Rail Passengers Association. And we'll come back to how you can get involved with those groups. But to conclude with Colorado for a second, because this presentation was called New Train for Colorado. Given all the pieces we've seen, the restrictions, the points of friction, the opportunities, what can we conclude about what we think is going to work in Colorado in terms of fleets? What can we buy that is going to set ourselves up for success and expansion over time, right? The first is that we want equipment that is dual mode. right? We've got electrification infrastructure. We've got wires in Denver, in the Denver metro area. Taxpayers already paid for it. It's important we use it. We're going to look like a bunch of dorks running diesel trains under wires like they've been doing in the Boston area for the last 20 years, right? Let's put the infrastructure to work that the taxpayers have paid for. Let's run trains on wires. Let's not waste the gas when we have energized wires already that can run trains with zero emissions locally in the Denver metro area. So let's use those. However, if we are going to buy trains that have a locomotive on them, we got to make sure that we've got the cab car as a very basic piece to turn trains around quickly. Denver Union Station is a stub end station. We've got buffer stops on one end. It's really important that trains can be turned around quickly. We're not having to do these really long and laborious turnaround maneuvers that add significant amounts of time to timetables. Transit is usually, and trains, right, can be slower than driving. So it's incumbent on us when we're planning, even the odds as much as we can. We need these travel times. We need the operating schedules to be as competitive as they can be. Cab cars are going to be a requirement if we're going to use the traditional locomotive hauled structure. Front range passenger rail, the ambition is to run somewhere between 8 to 10 trains a day in the first segment that goes to voters as a sales tax, or what we think is going to probably be funded via a sales tax. If we're going to go to voters and ask for money to build a service that's somewhat frequent, 8 to 10 trains a day, getting kind of close to that double digit mark, we're going to need to use the 6 high floor tracks that share with RTD at Denver Union Station of the 8. The 2 low floor tracks are going to be mostly spoken for, especially by the time this is in service. The only way we're going to be able to pull this off is using high floor vehicles, or at least vehicles that can board most of the cars at Union Station from those high floor platforms. So high floor, we think, is the only way to go for front range passenger rail in particular. Level boarding, right, is going to require dedicated station sidings, right? Most of the track that exists outside of the Denver core is owned by a private Class 1 freight railroad. In order to work around their operations, we're going to need to make sure that we raise enough money and build that infrastructure, the dedicated siding infrastructure, and pay the freight railroads the amount of money that we need to pay them to maintain that additional infrastructure, those additional sidings, those additional switch tracks. And then finally, I think just from a point of expandability, right, we don't want 10 trains a day to be the ultimate end game for the Front Range corridor. We see growth. We've seen phenomenal population growth in the Front Range over the last 15 years, right? We expect that there will be major growth periods again in the future in the Front Range. We need to build the infrastructure we have to be expanded. And in practice, what that means is, so say at the beginning, we only have enough money to build maybe one platform, right? Well, let's make sure that we build it in a way where we don't need to tear it back out as soon as we need to build another platform, right? So making sure that these station districts that we build are designed to be expanded. We can add tracks, add capacity over time. So that's it. That concludes my presentation. The goal is we're going to follow up with this with a roundtable with some of our partners at the Colorado Rail Passengers Association, as well as our partners in Utah at the Utah Rail Passengers Association and the Via Rio Grande Group. So just wanted to say thank you for checking this out. And I do want to give just a quick plug for those of you who want to get involved with some of our partner organizations, just how you can do that. Based on just using QR codes to expand first from us, Greater Denver Transit. Take a photo of this page. We'll take you to our website. You can check out our events page. We meet every month on the 3rd Thursday of every month. This month, it's going to be this Thursday. We meet at Union Station at 6 p.m. right here in downtown Denver. We try to make the content really fun. This is not just drive PowerPoints the whole time. We do group activities. We go out for drinks afterwards. So we'd welcome anyone who lives in the Denver area who's interested in checking us out. 3rd Thursday of every month. Colorado Rail Passengers Association. They're the RPA for Colorado. They've done phenomenal, terrific work in preserving Denver Union Station, bringing back the ski train, preserving the Southwest Chief. They're a great group to be a part of. Via Rio Grande, these are the folks behind the Rio Grande plan who are trying to find a way to build consensus to restore the Rio Grande Depot in Salt Lake City and reinvigorate the western part of the downtown area, eliminating grade crossings, addressing those safety issues, and really creating the beginnings of what should be a phenomenal entire new neighborhood on the western side of downtown Salt Lake City, being reconnected to the rest of the business district to the east. And then finally, the Utah Rail Passengers Association. This group is led by Mike Christensen, based in the Salt Lake area. They have been putting together a phenomenal vision. I presented to you in Link, Utah. Highly recommend giving their website a look. And if you live in the Salt Lake area, highly recommend getting involved with both of these groups. They are doing phenomenal work. So yeah, that concludes the presentation. Keep an eye out on our YouTube channel. Our goal is we're going to be hosting a roundtable to discuss what some of these opportunities mean for us, and also give a preview of what the Front Range Passenger Rail campaign is going to look like, especially if the project is going to be advancing as soon as November of 2026. It's not a huge on-ramp for us to get there, and there's a huge amount of education, as well as just community trust building and buy-in that we're going to need for this ballot measure to be successful in November. So thank you for your attention. Would love to see more folks get involved with these groups. All of these groups are doing amazing work. Last but not least, I should not fail to mention All Aboard Northwest. If you live north of Utah and Colorado and you want to see more service restored to Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, the Northwest in general, highly recommend giving them a follow. So get involved with these groups. There are so many reasons to be excited about intercity passenger rail and the potential we have, the political momentum we've seen over the last couple of years. Now is the time to get involved. Now is the time for us to make progress in getting the West prepared for and investing in intercity passenger rail. Until then, until next time, be well. Take care, everybody.